I'm Makini Smith. After going through a divorce, my sister passing away, experiencing narcissistic abuse, and some significant health scares, I realized through sharing my story that I wasn't alone in my suffering. Suffering, subjective distress generated by the experience of being out of balance. In a deep dive to holistically heal mind, body, and soul is where I discovered peace, clarity, and connection. It is impossible to be truly wise without some real-life hardship, and we cannot develop post-traumatic wisdom without making it through, and most importantly, through it together. Social connection builds resilience, and resilience helps create post-traumatic wisdom, and that wisdom leads to hope. Hope for you and others witnessing and participating in your healing, and hope for your community. A healthy community is a healing community, and a healing community is full of hope because it has seen its own people weather, survive, and thrive. Thank you for joining us on the Heal Her podcast, HEAL. Honor, elevate, and love her podcast, formerly known as the You Walk in My Stilettos podcast, the top 1.5% most popular show globally, where we have conversations with extraordinary women on their journey towards wholeness and harmony. And since you're already here, you may as well subscribe. As a certified mindset coach, guiding women towards peace, clarity, and connection within, supporting the direction of the system toward wholeness, my goal here is to help you thrive. Merel Kriegsman is a Wealth Muse, business mentor, and women's wealth advocate dedicated to helping you become the wealthiest women in your lineage. A former cleaning lady turned self-made millionaire matriarch, she believes that the most powerful thing we can do for our children is become unapologetic female leaders who fearlessly demand what we're worth and get it. Her insights, based on helping over 1,000 women step into self-funded wealth, have been featured on CBS News, ABC News, and in publications like Forbes, Fast Company, Entrepreneur, and Good Housekeeping. Now, we had Merel on, I believe it was like episode 35 or something like that. And it's almost rare for me to have a guest on a second time, but I loved our conversation so much. It resonated with me. It resonated with our listeners. So we needed to have you back. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be back, It was an honor to be there. And now I'm back. So I'm very grateful that we get to chat for another however long this episode is.
Me too. I'm excited because I feel like, I feel blessed every time I get to have a conversation for the podcast because it's like a form of therapy for me. It affirms things, it confirms things, I learn things. But I also get to meet amazing humans that I get to stay connected with. And I felt like our conversation, we covered so much. I think we titled the episode because you were talking about regenerative farming and healing and how people can do the same. And we discussed so many things, but it was like we ended that episode with us talking about, us being introverts and how we can still thrive and survive, in this business world without the hustle or doing things that don't feel authentic to us. So we'll definitely jump into that. But before we, go there, for the listeners who didn't have an opportunity to listen to episode 235, if you wanted to give us a synopsis of your story and how you got to where you are presently for our new listeners.
Yeah. So I don't know what I said last time, it's like one of those things where it's like, I can tell my biography in like 55 different ways, like which angles shall we run with today? But if I just go by today, I come from a very artistic family, was born and raised in Europe. I'm from Holland. I studied to be an opera singer. That's how I met my husband, Keith. We lived in Germany for about 7 years, had 2 little girls, crossed over to Canada, where he is from, and had another daughter. So now we have 3 little girls, and we live on a farm And we sort of rent out most of the land. We're responsible for about 10 acres of it, which is a lot of work.
It's a lot,
That's a lot of work. We're very, very busy bees throughout the year. During the winter, we're now going into slow season because, it's going to snow and like the geese have passed us and it's sort of just like wrap up season. And it's been a little bit longer this year because temperatures are still nice. So yesterday I was in the garden actually for about an hour and a half and just feeling so connected, talking to God while I was like tending some things, and so sort of like parallel to that, or, part of that is of course like the wealth journey. I left my parents' house like with very little understanding of finance and money. It sort of was there and I didn't understand it. And I'd never opened an envelope from, the tax department because I was sort of like afraid of math and numbers. And, so it just sort of left the house without really understanding what it took in a way. And so I found myself very quickly like in debt and not knowing how to make money and feeling very confused and very like finance and money was there to teach me some very hard lessons about myself. That's how I felt. And so I started to read about money and educate myself on anything from like marketing, sales, money mindset, like all those things. And then right around the time I was pregnant with our first one, which was in my mid-20s, it sort of just clicked inside of me. I was, realizing that I came from a very long lineage of women that have been very dependent on others for, they're sustaining themselves financially and how it had impacted their choices and how it had impacted their self-worth. And I just wanted something different for the next generation and for myself. So I remember just, holding my tummy, my big tummy in my hands and just sending out that signal to the universe and saying like, okay, I'm ready, I'm ready for a different story. And then things just landed on my path that led to creating a multi-million-dollar business in the online space and helping lots of amazing women, not just like step into financial well-being, but also stepping into purpose and alignment and really seeing how they could make lots and lots of money and create abundance with their gifts, besides serving their families. And, so it's been an incredible journey. And I hope that we get to talk about the fork in the road that I find myself on today, because I'm sort of, again, in a massive up-leveling sort of current identity death rebirth process. As I step into what is the next level for me. And I'm definitely operating in what I call my 10x courage right now, which is exhilarating, terrifying, deeply surrendered at the same time. So just happy to have that conversation with you, Makini.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many things that I want to jump into. First of all, thank you for sharing this synopsis and for, I want to say, even with our first conversation, like what you were saying a while ago, you don't remember which
version I ran it. Yeah. There's one version, but there's like different angles,
Yeah, I get it. I get it completely. So on the previous episode, we talked about, what you learned about money from your mother and your grandmother growing up. We talked about how the pandemic and postpartum affected your mental health.
Yeah.
We talked about understanding the depth of faith that's required to manifest abundance as co-creators with God. We definitely talked about allowing things to happen, the flow, not forcing things because we're pushing away and blocking our blessings. And then you talked about the age gap between you and your husband, but still having such a tight-knit bond and you guys doing a lot together.
Yes.
So I think I wanted to start with, I think we ended that episode with talking about you being in a season of surrendering.
Yeah.
And now you just mentioned like being in that fork in the road, and it's almost like a dying of the old self and rebirth of the new. So I would love if you could start by just explaining to us, like, what has that process been like for you? What does that look like? How does that feel?
Basically me desperately trying to grasp for control, and God like knocking it out of my hands at every turn. It is not always a pretty process. But I would say that the days that I feel myself moving towards the divine and towards, what my divine assignments are in this life are the days that I actually listen. It's like, I don't know why some days I just wake up and I decide I have to figure it all out by myself and just, sort of crawl up into my mind and just go sit there and judge and be harsh on myself and harsh on my husband and harsh on the past and harsh on the future. So I think for me, this process, I've gone through multiple moments like this in my life, I have to say. So it's not like, I sort of come prepared.
Yeah.
It feels I've had some moments like this in my life already, including going through a very severe eating disorder in my teens, where I was forced on my knees and I was grasping for control, right? Of course, like food, right? And women. It's a lot of like, I feel out of control, so I'm going to control this one thing that I feel I can control. And so letting go of that, what basically is an addiction, I think prepared me well for the rest of my life. Basically, like it gave me skills and self-awareness that has come in extremely handy. And now, right, I'm sort of at this point, like very keenly realizing that the insomnia that I've been struggling with for the last few years is just, anorexia 2.0, right? It's again, trying to control like what should be a subconscious process, like digestion, right? And sort of having performance anxiety around things that should be totally normal, right? And part of our everyday routine. So I'm seeing myself and I'm working through it and I'm making strides. And so I'm very, very proud of myself in sort of like those, good moments where I'm actually listening and have grace with myself in the process. But yeah, it's truly like, I feel, right, like what God requires of us is to literally walk away from what we've built. Right? I would say be willing to walk away from anything that we've built, right? Except the people that we love, right? Yeah. That's something that for me, like never, like I would never walk away from my family. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like the people stay, but the things go.
Yeah.
And I think especially when you are very successful, then you're like, wait, that's now part of my identity. I've become very sort of spoiled in the sense that I haven't felt like I needed to be on my knees with my hands open because, I have my pockets full. My pockets were full and my coffers were full. And I've sort of, I've become a little like behind on my spiritual discipline here, and my connection. And I thought I could sort of do it without God there for a while. And just based on, my own wits. And then, these big things happen where it's actually no. My daughters, they love the kiffness, the kiffness, like the silly cat sounds that then are turned into like these miraculous songs. And he also takes, there's this tiny clip of this boy singing, when you act too high and mighty, right? Because tomorrow you will fall down on your face, right? That one, right? And then that we have to be grateful for sunshine. We have to be grateful for rain. We have to, right, embrace like the good, but also the pain. And that is such a how you say that for me, like a place of spiritual alignment, where I just feel myself like clicking into like the center of that sort of dynamo, right? That God force is. Yep. And it's like, oh yeah, like from this place, I can actually hear what my next assignments are. And I don't really get to have a say in like wanting to stay cushioned and in the familiar, because it is already gone, whether I like it or not, it doesn't exist anymore. So that's very much what I'm in. So it's a very tender process and day to day. And I think it's beautiful. I think it's so beautiful that we get to be like spiritual lambs, right? Just sort of shaky on our legs, throughout our lifetime, again and again and again, just to sort of be called back to the source, right? And to say, no, we have to do it together.
Yes. Wow. Okay. So there's so much that you said there that I want to talk about, that I want to unpack, because I feel like as women, and also I feel like many of us who are coming from a place of not processing our childhood wounds or childhood traumas, where we are trying to control everything today, right? We're
totally.
We're, the anxiety of, worrying about not being able to control tomorrow and all these things. I love that you're transparent about that as someone who has attained millions, because I feel like there may be women that are listening to this that think that, once they've reached a certain level of quote unquote success, that they're exempt from certain experiences, or that the people that they see that are doing successful things don't have those experiences. So I love and appreciate your transparency. You talked about listening to God, and being obedient, because, it's so common for us to pray. So we are talking to God, yes, but are we being still enough to listen for the answer? Are we being still, because, we're on the go, the anxiety and us trying to control. So we're like, telling God, I need this, or I want this, or whatever, but we're not being still enough to listen. And then the obedience part of, letting go and not controlling, because it's oftentimes we hear God say something, we're like, oh yeah, no, I'm not doing that.
I know, right? Yeah.
That sounds too uncomfortable. Oh, let go of my business. Oh no, I'm not doing that. I built this. I did this. I did that. And it's the control, right?
I have a reputation to uphold, right? I need people to see me a certain way. I know. And it's very much, like, I think there's such power in realizing that it'll never go away. Being in school will never go away, right? It is there to stay. And I think that actually removes the power away from money and back into, right, the hands of God. And it's perfect that way, right? Because that million is not going to save us from having a human experience, from needing spiritual humility. And honestly, when you talk about childhood trauma, so my parents were fairly traditional in that my mom was the homemaker and my dad was the financial provider. And what I realized is that my mom always felt so undervalued. Now, I don't even know if that's from my dad or from just a house that she grew up in, right? And what she witnessed. And that's their business, right? It's their business. But I grew up with my mom feeling so deeply underappreciated for being like truly an extraordinary mother and homemaker. Like she would make any decorations for any sort of spiritual highlight throughout the year, whether it was Easter or Christmas or St. John's or whatever. She would make decorations from scratch. She would teach us how to create art. She would advocate for, me and my siblings. My siblings were all special needs kids growing up. Truly extraordinary. And she was so undervalued. And I remember, seeing her sort of flee into like the back of the beautiful gardens that we always had and sort of sit in a corner and just cry while she was like smoking a cigarette and which was her sort of like her vice, right? Smoking some cigarettes. And I remember, like, I never want to feel this vulnerable to be in a position where, a husband, right, would underappreciate me for my homemaking and my child rearing. And so I think subconsciously I was like, I'm just going to choose to be a provider like my dad, because, right, he was never doubted in his contribution. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think a lot of the choices that I made were to succeed like so outrageously. I was literally creating million upon million while pregnant, while birthing, and people around me were like, what's this girl doing? Like, this can never, like, she has to like, at one point, like, just sit her ass down and rest, like, where's this energy coming from? And some of it was definitely divinely fueled. I really believe that, but some of it was also fueled by just, right, as long as I make millions of dollars, nobody can tell me that my contribution isn't valid. And so this year, for me, the sort of the conscious choice to start to sort of pulling my current business apart, and I really want to talk about also what's coming, because I think that's very exciting, is because I want to be in a deeply intimate partnership, not just sexually, but across the board, like with my husband, even more than we already are. Like, that is really important to me. I want to be a deeply present mother to our children. I want to be a contributing member to my amazing community here where I live in rural Saskatchewan. And I was just feeling that the constant sort of, how to describe it? It's like the hyper alertness needed in my CEO role. The way that I had built my business, where I was needed in basically every department to some extent. And it was really built on sort of personal brand, right? So if I couldn't step back, I couldn't go inward to go through a prayerful year every once in a while, which I honestly feel everybody needs, especially introverts. That didn't feel possible. So, and that's when the process of just sort of letting it go started, and of course, we would prefer to let things go when a new thing has already shown up and it's clear and the path is like, oh yeah, it's okay. Like step number 1, step number 2. And that, because that's never the case though, right? It's the sacrifice, the spiritual sacrifice is to step onto that path unknown.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I just want to commend you for your courage of obedience, because I feel like we don't recognize how much courage it takes, one, to be obedient and let go, especially when we're used to functioning as a trauma response of the control, or, of the anxiety of go, 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 all of those things. I really appreciate the transparency in the journey, because I feel like even for those that may not have financially reached your level of success, that are dealing with those things, are probably dealing with it internally and thinking something is wrong with them, or it's just something that they are dealing with on their own. So, every time I get to have these deep conversations, I am just truly grateful, not only for the impact that it has on me, but I know that, the listeners, because the show is streamed in like 65 different countries, and
it's just amazing
all over. Yeah. So it's like, I feel that it's a blessing to be able to co-create even these experiences with you. And the show wouldn't be, what it is without women like you being as transparent about your journey. So I commend you for your courage.
Thank you.
Like, even you being open about why you wanted to, subconsciously hustle so hard, being able to have the choices and how it affects your self-worth and all those things. I think maybe for myself, I feel like sometimes those are things that are kind of overlooked, or we're not even aware of. That's why we're doing these things, what we saw growing up and what we didn't want to recreate, and all of those things.
And I think, I think there's truly like the period of rebellion against that was actually necessary for me to get to where I am today. Right. I think there's also sometimes judgment that we have to sort of go so extreme, to sort of be in this counter reaction to the trauma response.
Yeah.
But I just want to look at myself from the last 7 years, and also look at myself with the grace of, no, I think that was actually a necessary part of the unfolding of me, and then through me, what is able to come through, in regards to how, I support people and I help people, whether that is very close to home or worldwide. I really trust that. And I hope that everybody listening, like if you have that realization, that you have been operating in sort of like a counter response to move away from whatever painful experience you experienced yourself or witnessed people experiencing that were extremely dear to you growing up. It's okay, but it's also, at one point you have to ask yourself, like, how high a tolerance to suffering are you willing to sustain throughout your life? Because, when you command my courage, I was listening to you, and I'm like, thank you. But part of me is like, girl, I had no choice. I was aching on the inside. It was just like, I have to. Okay. I'm on my knees. Okay. I'm listening. Right. It's usually through, I would say that a lot of spiritual, deep spiritual lessons show up as I feel I have no choice but to go down on my knees right now. Right. Or these things that this is very often the case. Like, I seem to desire two things, and I seem to it feels like I can't have both. Right. Yeah. And then you need to really keenly examine, your sort of outrageous attachment to having both those things, and asking yourself, is it a true desire, or is it, is one of them, maybe both of them, channeled by fear? And learning that discernment is, that's what we do. That's what life is, right? It's like learning to be more and more discerning. And quicker in recognizing that sometimes the despair that we create and the level of suffering, in the end, is a choice. But the sacrifice, in many moments, might be bigger than what you are willing to give. Right. And that's where we hurt. That's where, we are in great pain.
Yes.
Right. And so I think if we can build with this idea of, for example, your podcast, are you willing to pull it if that's what, shows up for you? Right. Or are you going to go oh man, it's
are you reading my mind 60, right now?
60 countries, I built this whole thing. It's like ranking X, Y, and Z, worldwide. Right. Those are the things that make us feel good about ourselves. But in the end, it is not on solid ground. Right. Yeah.
You are totally reading me right now. Literally, before we even started recording this episode, I was thinking to myself, because we just did we just had the 5-year anniversary for the podcast.
Yeah.
Yes, it has great numbers, great listens, widespread impact all over the world. And I thought to myself, I think I need a break.
Yeah.
And it's the thought of, okay, well, if I take a break, will that affect the listens? Will that affect, all these things? And it's I feel like I'm in the season of watering me. This is where I'm nourishing Makini. Because in order for me to be able to continue to pour out to other people, my cup needs to be full. And although I am beyond grateful for where things are right now, I feel like I need to be watered more. I need to be nourished more. I need to be poured into more. And I'm in that season of I'm going to the chiropractor twice a week. I'm getting massage every week. I'm going to therapy every 2 weeks. Okay, well, maybe I also need to pause with the podcast. I need to pause with certain things. So as you're saying that, I'm like, you are reading me a book.
It's so hard, right? You literally feel like you don't have permission to pause.
Yes.
When you're that successful and there's that many people looking at you for nourishment, right? Then that's very much the first thought that pops up in our head. I don't have permission to pause. right? I just need to keep going because people are relying on this. And I think, and honestly, like I can speak to this from a perspective of being an introvert, but it might also be true for extroverts. Like, honestly, right. I really, when I look at my whole life's trajectory, I'm curious how this is for you, Makini, but I have gone through sometimes like just 2 or 3 years, like really going inward and really being like a consumer and a receiver, right? A consumer of like beautiful movies, beautiful books, art, inspiration, being right, like really just like drinking it in. And then I'm able to sort of take that and I don't know if it's sort of like I don't know how to describe it. It's like a feeling, right? Where you all of a sudden like flip and you start to like create and it feels amazing and empowering and nurturing, right? And then when it starts to feel like, okay, now I'm just like, I'm doing it with my willpower, I'm running on willpower. That's your sign, right? To drop it.
Yeah.
Let go. And I think all of us, right, need to be willing to, like, I was talking to an amazing client of mine, and she just wanted to have successful launches. And I said to her, right, as long as you're so attached to it, right, it can't come to you, right? You have to be truly reconciled with the fact that you might have to take a 9-to-5 for a while, right, or a part-time job. Right. And she was like, oh, it would kill me to have to go back to, right, employment. And I said to her, but you don't know, like, she's a single mom. I said, maybe you'll meet the love of your life while you're working at this place. And the only way you're going to meet that person is, to actually be obedient and listen to what is required of you right now. And it was absolutely stunning. Like the moment she shifted into, I am willing to do whatever, right, shows up as my next assignment, to be truly willing, to be truly surrendered. And all of a sudden, like there's this magic unfolding in her business that she's never experienced before. She's not grasping for control anymore. And now like the real, right, divine blessings can come through. And it's just stunning to watch.
Yeah. So I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking about almost like what you were explaining the first time we spoke about, even with the land and with farming, how there's this period where the land needs to like rest and restore, and when you see like the worms and stuff coming in, and that it's right. You got me into farming now.
It's like, let's talk about worms for the next half hour. We love worms.
but like it's, I guess, similar to the analogy that I use with like people who go to the gym. Like your muscle is not actually being built while you're working out. It's during the resting stage, right? Yeah. So when you said you're not sure if this is like an introverted thing or an extroverted thing, I know, I also know that people have, a misconception of introvert versus extrovert and all this stuff. But basically, introverts, it's really about how we recharge, right? Like it's an energy thing. It's not just about being shy or what have you. With introverts, we recharge in our alone time when we are around other people. Because we are so, I'm going to say, sensitive to energy, right? Yeah. It's depleting for us to be around other people. Yeah, we love you, but it requires a lot of energy. With extroverts, they get charged up being around other people. So they're getting their energy from other people. Yes. So in terms of like being an introvert, and even in the stages of, like you said, like consuming, and taking things in, I have had to learn to do that in between everything. Like it's almost like parts of every day require, that time to recharge and consume, where it's like I'm listening to an audiobook or I'm reading a book or, taking in a podcast in order for me to continue to serve and to give out and to pour out. It's like I have to have this constant, it's almost like an IV of me constant.
So here's like a radical thought, right? Like, what if as creators, we give ourselves permission to sometimes just disappear for 2 years? I
am seeing so much of that right now. I have there's a guy that I had, I think it's maybe in 2019. I flew to the States to speak at his event, and he did a couple of events each year after that. And he disappeared off of social media for like 2 years. And he popped back up maybe this week. And he was just like, he's had the most successful time ever. He wrote a book on, how to multiply your income without social media, like all of these things. And there's more and more people that I see that I'm getting their newsletters where they're increasing their income, increasing their business, but I no longer see them on social. I've noticed you haven't posted on social since like last year, or it was like April or something. And I'm like, I want to get there. That's where I'm working at right now.
So let's talk about that. So for example, like what I'm doing right now is like, I'm looking at like the situation that we're in. Keith and I are talking about and strategizing every day. Like we're in a unique position. We have no debt. We own our house. We have over $1 million to invest. And basically there's this idea of we should be able, with the money we have right now, create wealth for generations to come. Like if we step into truly becoming investors, and like Robert Kiyosaki wrote a really clarifying book on this. It's called the cash flow quadrant or something. And he talks about like most of us operate in the quadrant side of the E and the S. So it's like employee or small business. Mm-hmm. And I can honestly say after reading that book that I was trying to pull my small business into big business. I was trying to make that transition. I was trying to outsource things. But there was still like a mindset in me where it was like, but I'm the best at doing all these things. And when other people do them, they're not that good and it doesn't work as well. It's like totally true. Right. So basically in essence, I created a big business out of what was essentially, right, when you look at the DNA, was actually a small business. Right. So really, really interesting realizations. But on the other side of that quadrant, you have big business and you have investing. Right. So Keith and I are at this point where we're just like mad educating ourselves on becoming investors and maybe somehow still be business owners on top of that, but really, design systems that then other people can implement rather than creating a personal brand and having people purchase because they like you and they want to be like you. I think to some extent that can be inspiring. I don't think it can be the core strain of your business and you sustaining that year after year, right? Because it's about you and you need to sometimes just fall off the face of the earth for 2 years in order to, right, be like that creator phoenix kind of entity. I feel that many of us are, right? Where we have to go through sort of death and rebirth cycles. So we're really looking at the other side of the quadrant and read the book, by the way. It's a great book. Like people realize things about yourself and also like the way that you speak, right? So for example, people in the E sector, so the employee sort of side of that quadrant, they talk about security and safety. And good benefits. Right. People in who are essentially small business owners, they talk about quality and their product and right. They're the best. They're basically like artists, right? And then Big B, right, has its own whole language. And I, right, investor section of that quadrant also has like a very specific sort of vocabulary that you can recognize people like even around you and start to really understand who is where, right, and why. But so like I'm basically in a place right now where it feels like nobody's starting from scratch, but it feels like, wow, I'm taking in a lot of new information because I want to operate on that side of the quadrant, not the left side of the quadrant. And it's exciting and we're exploring all kinds of options and we're looking at like, what do we really have an affinity for? Like we're considering being involved in like low cost housing, creating that for people, right? Like all kinds of stuff that if like a year ago, I would have gone like, wait, I'll just make lots of money in my business and then we'll just spend it. And, I'll just have to sustain it. I'll just have to keep doing it. Right. And instead it's like, no, right. The invitation is for you to be a student right now and take in a lot of information and call up people in your network and ask if you can learn from them.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, like, honestly, I can say there is no false pride left. Right. I've burned through it all, which is a painful process this year. Right. And even last year already. But now I'm at a place where I'm just learning, educating. We're reading books together. It's very exciting. So I'm like a fresh little budding plant in the sort of in investment sector, instead of trying to sustain myself on the wrong side of the quadrant for wealth building.
Wow. That is powerful. Even as you were explaining it, I was like, you're right. Like, so interesting enough right now, so the more that I have focused on my self-care and watering me, the less, I'm going to say, I don't want to say the less I've had to work, but the less I've had to hustle.
Yeah.
But the more income I've been able to make. So this year, so last year I said, I don't want to do any more one-on-one clients. It's requiring way too much energy from me. So I said, I wanted to do corporate clients. I manifested that and I got my corporate clients. So in getting the corporate clients, I don't have to work as hard, but it's like the conversations that I'm having with my corporate client, because they're in the employee mindset. So trying to get them to think outside of that. It's like, so having these conversations, and I know it's like, they're in the employee mindset, but they're still making six figures, but the conversation is like a struggle sometimes to get them to see things differently. Than I'm having with my peers that are making six figures as entrepreneurs. It's very different. I can totally see that.
And it's so, right. Like what I'm doing right now, I'm really looking at my network, and I'm going to, like I have like people that I know that run multiple, like whatever, 8, 9, whatever figure businesses, like just, and like transportation or housing, or right. Like these really, really big business sectors. And it's them that I want to start to really surround myself with, because it's interesting when you say, like, when you started doing more self-care, you started making more money. For me, it's like, I can't self-care my way out of this shithole that I'm in right now. God is like, nope. We're just like everything is, sort of like it felt like I was just like, trying to make it happen. When I also know what it feels like when I'm not trying to make it happen, and I was like, wait, like now I'm just trying to make things happen. And I have a lot of willpower, got a ton of discipline. I'm a high performer. I can do this, but I don't want to. I want to be in the place that God wants me to be, because I know what that feels like. And I know that then things come right onto my path, instead of me, right, sort of scouring for food all around me, and sort of, trying to, it's a completely different feeling. And I'm very grateful for it, even though like sometimes in the moment it feels really harsh. It was like, no, it's clear that where God wants me to be right now is on that side of the quadrant. And so I have to stop identifying with anything that's happening over here. But, I was also, you get so indoctrinated, right, by being in a certain scene where everybody counts this, and this one. I'm just like, counting on my fingers right now, as this is what success looks like. And this is when you've made it. And this is, what is good. And then, right. And then you go to next level, and it's like, wait, no, actually there's a completely alternative pathway for me. And I just have to be courageous enough to say yes to it.
Yes. Okay. So here's what I love. And I don't know if I'm attracting this or if this is just the vibration that I'm on, but there are so many women around me right now, that are being completely transparent about I want to say the struggles of success. I mean, to someone who, doesn't have certain things, they may view it as, I don't know, ungrateful, or I don't know what they would view it as. But my point is that I've always been someone who believed that the definition of success is different for each of us. And I remember when I first became an entrepreneur, like in 2009, for me, for years, success was just being able to keep a roof over my children's head, to be able to feed them. Like, you know, those things to me were success. You know, the awards and accolades, I didn't see those as success at the time. I was just like, whatever. Like, and then now, because I've been reading a lot of memoirs and biographies of women that I can relate to. And it's interesting. There, you know, women like Aurora James, who she's in the fashion industry. She's a fellow Canadian who, you know, moved to the States. Even like, you know, she may have a bad rap right now, but Jada Pinkett. There's also
like, who doesn't have a bad rap? Like,
right?
Like we all go through these like things as successful people, where it's like, oh yeah, I know, I'm in the naughty corner right now.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're in the spotlight, so people have you know, more eyes on what you were doing in your, you know, day-to-day life, and build their own stories around, you know, the glimpses that they get. But my point is, like, everyone's story, people may on the outside see all of these successes, all these accolades, all of these material things or tangible things, and not understand what that person is sacrificing or struggling with on the inside. So, you know, yourself being transparent about the journey. You know, when I read Aurora James' book and how, you know, she may have been featured in all these major platforms and having celebrities wear her stuff, but yet how much debt she was in, and the struggle she was dealing with behind the scenes. And, you know, Jada was talking about, you know, you're married to one of the most well-known men on the planet, and then, you know, you're planning on how to commit suicide and all these things, like these things that people are going through. So for the women listening, I want to make sure that they understand that, like, success is your definition of success. And no matter how quote unquote successful someone may be, we are all human. We are all having human experiences. The struggles, the sacrifices, the adversities do not go away once you quote unquote attain such success. Yeah,
absolutely. It's such an important, you know, piece of wisdom. And I think also, you know, like we can, I think, and giving ourselves permission to wholeheartedly desire certain accolades and stuff, I think is wonderful. You know, but the how we're going to get there. Yesterday, when I was in my garden and I was praying and I was saying, like, okay, I'm open, I'm listening. Right. God was just like, can you please, like, stop obsessing about how you're going to get somewhere, and just, you know, let me take the wheel, the wheel. And then I was like, oh my God, like, I'm doing it again. I'm trying to control, right, like, how we're going to get there. For me, security in old age, for example, is really important to me, right? My girls are going to be grown up. My husband is going to be either very elderly, or I'm going to be a widow. Right? Like, I don't want to end up in that place and be destitute on top of it. But I have to be willing to be in that place in order for, right, the universe, for divine love to actually be able to shine through in the way that is meant. I have to actually be in a place where, well, if that's my path, then that's my path. You know, and that's the scary thing, right? Or maybe the sort of the oxymoron of the whole thing is that we can plan all these things and think that we can sort of create security by reaching certain accolades and by having a certain number of money in the bank and by having a certain career path, you know, however we define success. But in the end, you know, are we, do we know that we can also be okay if that doesn't happen, that we can also be worthy if that doesn't happen, and that that we might be still, like, safe, even if those things don't happen.
Yeah. Wow. Question, just out of curiosity. Are you an HSP, like a highly sensitive person? Do you know?
Yeah. So my mom got that book in the late 90s. She was like, I think my kids are all highly sensitive. Like, I would say, and I honestly think, you know, part of this is maybe spiritual gift, and part of it is also trauma response. You know, it's just like being the sort of, in order to survive, right? I had to be able to read people very, very, very carefully.
The hypervigilance, the hyper-awareness.
Hypervigilance. Yeah. Hyper-awareness. No, absolutely. Right. And I think there's like pretty straightforward science to it, really, because I'm just looking at your body language. I'm looking at what's happening in your eyes. I'm looking at your breathing patterns, right? And I'm just noticing everything and translating that into information, right?
Yeah. I asked because, so I know I am. And when I have a conversation with someone else, and it's almost like you said, you know, the body language, all those things, but also the conversation. So for anyone who's listening, there's like I don't know, it's like 27 or 28 questions. If you want to take a simple test to find out if you're a highly sensitive person, look for the test online, Google it. I think the last time I took it, I was like a 26 out of 27. But there are certain gifts, that someone who is an HSP has. And so one is empathy. Our level of empathy is insane. And I'm definitely like, I cry for commercials. It's weird. Our creativity. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're all creative. You know, we're created in God's image. We're creators. But the level of creativity with HSP people is pretty high up there. I think it's sensory intelligence. And I'm someone who I'm hypersensitive to everything. So light, sound, touch, texture, you know, body language, all those things. The other one is like depth of processing and depth of emotion. So when you were speaking earlier about even, you know, trying to get to a level of intimacy with your husband and the connection, all those things. And I completely resonate with that, where for me, everything is about depth. You know, I don't like superficial or surface level anything.
It's the word that I looked at my content and ran it through some stuff, and like the word deep was like everywhere. It's like deep. Let's go deep, right? It's like surface sometimes is like excruciating.
Yes.
Right. And so it's really about, I think, cultivating the friendships and connections in the spaces that we are in, where we can go that deep. So for example, I don't know if I would ever want to create like bigger events. I like to have it slightly smaller and more intimate. So I can really touch every single person in some way, very personally. I think it's, you know, like, for example, this is very like just intimate, you know, sort of admission, but about, I think it was a week and a half ago, my insomnia was really, really bad. And my husband, who, you know, is still struggling to recover from a concussion, and he also has a really bad cough. So he'd been keeping me up at night. So my sleep had deteriorated, right, off of all the events that my family went through. And I had like the worst panic attack because I was like, Keith, like you woke me up. And it was panicking because I couldn't fall asleep. Like my heart rate instantly went super high. You know, it was just like, okay, I'm not going to sleep for the rest of the night. And he said, like, I'm just going to go because I need to get better. And so I spiraled in his absence, until I was a hyperventilating, like mess of a human being.
Wow.
And you know, the day after, right, he had just held me while I was hyperventilating, and then I eventually calmed down, and then eventually at 5:30 I gonked out, and the next day, you know, I was just so raw and so open, and so it's like feeling cracked open, you know, but also knowing like, okay, that was what my being needed, right, was to be cracked open. And I said to Keith, you know, like sometimes I just so badly want to take medication. You know, some of my siblings are on medication for anxiety. And I have absolutely no judgment about people who are on medication. But somehow my path has always been to just accept that I go through times where I feel like an absolute like exposed nerve. I just, you know, it's like, I don't know about you, Makini, but sometimes I'm like, this is so intense. It's just so intense. I feel everything so keenly. It's like there's no hiding from just like, like if I'm afraid, I'm terrified. If I'm happy, I'm blissed out of my mind. It's like,
Yes.
I never feel like I need mushrooms or drugs or anything, because it's just like I'm already right there, girl. Like I don't need anything. But the only true thing that has helped me in my life is right. It has a spiritual answer. It in the end, it surpasses the mental health conversation. It surpasses, understanding who I am with my human design or my astrology or any sort of personality test. It's literally like there's only a spiritual answer to feeling being able to navigate this journey for me.
Yeah. Wow. My eyes were watering when you were explaining your experience, because I recently had something similar with my partner.
Yeah.
And so for one, I've always said to him, like, I feel like my gift is a blessing and a curse, because there are days where it can be used to be so helpful. And there are days where it is so exhausting to feel so deeply. It's so exhausting to be so hypersensitive to sound, to light, to movement. It's exhausting.
The mood changes in our partners.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he was having a moment where he wasn't in the greatest mood for a couple of days. And because, we're hypersensitive to energy, to spirit, like I felt it so deeply. And I said to him, I can't handle this. It's too much. It is way too much for me. So, in combination too, because I was also having the insomnia issues, and I started Googling stuff because I have women around me in my age group that are all going through perimenopause. And I'm like, well, I had a partial hysterectomy. So how will I know? Like all these things.
Totally.
So I'm like, okay, mix in the HSP being like hypersensitive, mix in being an introvert, mix in like insomnia, possible perimenopause. Like I was like, I'm going insane. This is all too much.
This is like not a good cocktail right now.
Yeah. And I feel like that's probably where, part of the mindset of like, I need to like stop doing everything is coming in, because it's like everything is so intense. So even, having these conversations in the podcast, like I said, it's always been a form of therapy to me, but it's also so intense, and sometimes women are sharing things that are so deep, and sometimes sharing things that they've never shared publicly before, or never shared with anyone before. And it's like, it's intense.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just saying like, in my prayer, it's like, I place all this intensity that I feel sort of running through me like a current, right? I'm placing that on the altar. I'm surrendering it, because it's too much for me to hold. Right. It's too much for me to carry, right? All my worries, all my anxieties, I'm handing them over. And, to tie a bow around this conversation and come back to, right, agriculture. Right. It's what we need to let go of, right? Like when you think of agriculture, right. I use manure, right. And compost, like every single day that I'm gardening. Right. And it's shit. It's literally, right. It's shit. It's poop. And right. It's like you create and play with rot and decay. That's literally what you do. You lay it to rest. You put it on the earth so that then, right, this magical creative process can turn it into fertile soil. That's literally what we're shown by God as like, this is what everything is like. This is just an example of how this works, right? The creative process takes what we need to let go in order to not completely, toxify. Right. And it gets used to turn into fertile soil. Right. So it's the big, sort of request or invitation is to let go, let it go. Don't hold it.
Thank you for tying a bow around it. I think that bow just like gave me an epiphany. I'm going to like title this episode, like how to surrender. I feel like, we've talked a lot about letting go, about surrendering, about, not trying to control, and allowing things to happen. I feel so blessed by this conversation. Honestly, like I don't even want to do like the rapid fire questions at the end, because I feel like we have touched on so many different things, but I feel blessed by the depth of this conversation. So I want to thank you, Merel, for just being who you are. Your transparency. Like I said, it's not every day that, you know, people who are successful are open to share the depth of their struggles or adversities behind the scenes. And I think it's important for other people to hear, because it's almost like they're on their journey, you know, going towards their goals and their dreams. And then they hit a hurdle and they're like, okay, I quit. Like,
yeah, there must be something wrong. It's like, no, there's
yeah,
nothing wrong.
There's nothing wrong. It's a part of the process. You know, there's nothing wrong with starting over. There's nothing wrong with pivoting. There's nothing wrong with, you know, any of those things. So I thank you for your obedience. I thank you for, you know, showing us what it looks like to go through that process of, yes, being successful within your business, but also striving for success in your personal relationships and in everything that you're building. Just thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, Makini, and being such an amazing host. And I hope that our conversation gives you the freedom to give yourself permission to pause if that's what you feel is what you're invited into. Right? If that's what obedience looks like for you, then I hope that's what you say yes to.
Amen to that. Thank you. And to all of you healers out there, until next time, subscribe on all platforms. And we would love to hear what resonated with you. What part of this conversation touched you? What gems did you take away from our conversation? Feel free to screenshot this week's episode. You can tag myself, The Real Makini Smith. You can tag Merel at Merel Kriegsman, MERELKRIEGSMAN. And leave your thoughts in a review on Apple, just in case, you know, we're both pausing from Instagram at the moment. We would definitely love to hear how this episode has impacted you. A healthy community is a healing community, and a healing community is full of hope because it has seen its own people weather, survive, and thrive. So let's continue to heal her.